Welcome to the Living Room Disciple podcast. Longtime listeners of the show may remember a conversation between me and Nick O'Brien about children in the church and whether or not children should be a part of big services and that type of thing. That started me on quite the hunt online to figure out what is the church's stance and what should the church do as it relates to children in the church. And I kept noticing one particular name that came up in the footnotes of many articles, Dr. Marcia Bunge. Now, I reached out to her and I'm incredibly excited to share my conversation with her. Dr. Bunge, Marcia, has been researching and writing about children inside the church for 20 years. This relates to how to support parents and caregivers, how are children formed by the way we do church, and how should children be treated within the church, how should churches handle children's ministry, and much more. She's absolutely an expert on the topic, and I can't wait to share our conversation with her. If you haven't already, check us out on livingroomdisciple.com for more information about who we are and how you can support us. But now let's go ahead and hop over to the conversation with Dr. Bunge. Welcome to the Living Room Disciple podcast, where discipleship finds a home. Marcia, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation, Phil.
You are more than welcome. And our listeners may remember, so there's a very quick story to how you got on this podcast. And I'm going to tell it briefly for our listeners, because there's like November, right before Christmas, we released an episode, me and Nick O'Brien, my co-host. And in the conversation, we kind of almost debated a little bit about whether or not children should be a part of the larger worship service in a church. And very quickly, I realized that I was uneducated and I probably didn't have the most refined views. But I had views and I had thoughts. And so I did what any good millennial does, and I began Googling. Probably trying to Google just things to affirm my own beliefs.
Yeah.
And yeah, you've probably been there.
Find the one you like.
Yeah. I want to know the facts that I agree with me, so that way I can use those. Okay. But what kept happening is, as I was reading these articles, I pay attention to who gets cited consistently. And Marcia, your name kept coming up over and over and over again at the bottoms of these articles with all these quotes that I was most interested in. And so I don't know how long ago, but a few months ago I reached out, and I'm just so incredibly excited because from what I can tell, you have spent decades around the topic of children inside of the church and what is our responsibility to those children, how do we form them? And thank you for doing all that work.
Yeah, well, thank you. I have a passion for it, that's for sure.
Well, tell me a little bit, how did you get into studying and researching the topic of children in the Bible, and what is the scope of your study?
Okay, well, I went to the University of Chicago in graduate school several years ago, right? And in theology. And at that time, if I had said, oh, wow, I think we should be talking about children. Like, children are people. They're a third of humanity, right? And they're in our families, in our churches. I don't know why we're talking. We have many, many themes. Why don't we talk about children? They're part of the world too. And I think people would have just laughed at me. I even studied in Germany. They would have said, ach, das ist nichts for theology. No, please don't do it, because that's for people who like kids. That's really cute. But we're serious theologians, and that's not a topic for us, okay? So I didn't initially do it. I wasn't even thinking about it. I did a lot of work in 19th century German theology and had written and translated a bunch of stuff, lived in Germany 5 years, studied there to finishing my degree. But then I had children, and I also started teaching undergraduates. And it was like, wow, first of all, having a son, I have a son, he's now 30, and later adopted a daughter, had a miscarriage, and adopted a daughter from China, and also working with undergraduates. And it was like so strange. I thought, why are some of these young people coming to college so resilient, even though they haven't had the best life circumstances? They might have lived in poverty, they weren't rich. How come they're thriving? And some of the people who are very privileged, those students aren't thriving. what's going on before they come to college at age 18? What are we doing in the church? And a lot of them didn't know anything, had come from a church, couldn't say anything about their faith or the beliefs. And then something funny too with my son, I was asked to teach Sunday school when he was 3 years old, right? And I was like, well, yeah, I'm a professor. There is no problem. I can do this. I can whip it out. And I looked at that material and it was horrific. It really was not creative. It wasn't age appropriate. There was even a lesson for the 3-year-olds about Job. Yeah, let's talk about Job. And it was just terrible crafts. You're supposed to make a smiley face on a paper plate and a sad face on a paper plate. And we'll tell the story. He was okay, but oops, then he lost everything. But then he turned out okay. And it was like, what is going on? And that really started me thinking, what is our conception of children? What are we thinking that we're thinking, well, that's going to be a great thing. And I started searching everywhere for what is the best faith formation program, because I had to create the session every time myself. I spent all day Saturday working on crafts and stuff. So that got me going. And then also adopting my daughter just to see what happens. We had to take a class on adoption. And some of these, we learned about a child who was, treated very badly by the parents and had to be given up. But then they had another baby and they threw that baby against the wall and broke her arm. But, okay, nothing really happened to those parents, just don't know, no. And the next child they actually killed. So then they were put in prison. They had money. And so it was like kind of weird, like, gosh, if I hit you and assaulted you, I would have some consequences. Why don't we have more consequences for people who assault children, right? And actually 28% of our children in our country are hit so hard they have injuries. So by their parents or relatives.
It's interesting because it's different, but there's overlap between our stories. I would say that I wouldn't have really considered the conversation about children in the church serious until I had kids, and then now I've got this. Luke is my oldest, and I'm, he was like 3 or 4, and I had no idea how to teach this kid about the Bible, and I wasn't. He didn't like childcare inside the church service, and so we did this crazy thing inside of our church, and we brought him into the big service, and then he seemed to begin thriving.
Yeah.
And it started making me ask questions like, why do we do this? And why do we do that? And then me and my wife took foster care training and, because we were investigating that. And again, similar things like thinking about how children are treated and how they are viewed inside of our society and inside of our churches.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of seeing the connection here.
Yeah. Boy, you have that foster care training. It is. And to adopt, you have a lot of training. It's like, wow, you just see the problems of so many challenges of children and all these adverse childhood effects, and some who aren't even then. Well, anyway, we overlap quite a bit. And then seeing that in the church, and you're kind of just wondering, well, what's going on?
How did we get here?
How did we get there? Why are we doing this? Right? So, gosh, that's fun, Phil, because that's a big part of my work, is asking 2 questions. No matter what setting I'm in, and even to myself, what are my assumptions about children, my conceptions about children? And that relates very much to what are my commitments to children.
So let's start with assumptions. And I'd like to talk about both those questions, because this is really important to me. And I know to you and to many of our listeners. So thinking about, we're going to, focusing on the Western church, on the church, inside the United States and heavily influenced by the United States and the way we participate as an ecclesiastical community. What does it appear that our assumptions are, broad brush? I know different churches do different things, but broad brush, what does it appear that our assumptions are about children?
Well, and I can speak, I think it's kind of common. I also hear the testimony of this assumption from my college students. But sometimes we assume children are to be taught, right? But we don't think about, wow, they're also learning. They're also teaching us things. There are
Mm.
also people who have ideas and thoughts and questions. And it's a more of a kind of, hey, we're supposed to help them, protect them. They're vulnerable, guide them. And we do need to do that. But we also don't see them as, on the other hand, enough, I don't think, as, wow, they're people with questions. Wow, they're people who contribute, who contribute to our families, even when they're little.
Mm.
So I think there's a narrow, it's kind of a thin assumptions. And I really like to think about this kind of multifaceted conception we need to have. So, for example, you know, my students tell me they went to church, but they were not allowed to ask questions. And
Mm-hmm.
if you can't ask questions, you can't really learn.
Yeah.
And they have great questions. And they come in my class and they say, wow, this is the first time I thought we could ask questions. So I think there's a little flat, and it's varied from denomination to denomination. But generally, I think too, it can, we do have this little sort of a flatter, um, one dimensional view of children as,
Kind
hey,
of, we can give to them,
yes, we
we can
give to
teach
them.
them,
They're vulnerable. We got to
hmm
protect them.
but we can't
Remember,
expect them to teach us.
no. But gosh, in the Bible, children are spirit filled, right? They're
Mm.
models of faith. And so, as Christians, you'd think, well, we know that better than most communities. I know when I had my daughter, my son, even, it was like I was all ready. I'm a professor. Okay, I got my books. How am I going to do this? I can teach my child. I almost thought of it as a project,
Yeah.
okay.
Yes.
But then you have this beautiful baby.
For the
He's
record, I'm
maybe
like in
five.
this season now. Like I'm like diving through the book of Genesis with all four of my boys, considering well, one's 18 months, and I'm going through like deep verse by verse, and like we're bringing
Yeah.
up Hebrew, and I'm like I have no idea if I'm nailing it or if I'm totally losing my kids. So this is where I'm at right now today. So,
well, well, actually reading with them is wonderful. So that's
okay.
really a good thing to do. But it was like had this beautiful baby then, and it was like a revelation to me. You know, watching my son grow, his reactions. Kids can say things that are awfully true. They can
Hmm.
see things. They're at very young ages, they notice what's happening. They ask great questions about why do we do this? And
Hmm.
so it was more like a revelation. So I always think like that now. If my students too, I am teaching them as a professor, but I'm learning from them.
Hmm.
They're vulnerable, they need some guidance, but they also teach me. And this kind of richer view of all of us have vulnerabilities, and but we also have strengths, and even little young children have strengths. So
I feel like I could hear somebody saying, like let's just let's pick
yeah,
like a church pastor. I feel
yeah.
like they would listen to you and they'd be like, Marcia, I think that kids can teach us. I think that we can look at them and we can understand. So if that's what that person believes, because I think most people would nod their head. You know what I mean? I think we act like we believe it's one way, but we verbalize that we believe it's two ways. So how would
Mhm.
we demonstrate? Like, what are the actions that a church leader would need to take to create a church environment in which we live out a two-way understanding of our relationship to children?
Mhm. Mhm. Uh, well, there's a lot of people are doing some good things. Like maybe you know the work of Jerome Berryman. Jerome Berryman. Um, uh, he does godly play, and that is
Okay.
a beautiful. And when I was searching for, well, what's the curriculum that respects children, I landed on that a long time ago. And the basic assumption is we really respect children. We really
Mm,
respect children, and there's room for wonder. There's a little room for, hey, what did you think? A little room for feedback, Their questions, what did you think? How do you see yourself in the story? So I think it comes down to, and I like what you said, we talk one way, but we act another.
hmm
Certainly being open to what children have to say, and we shut them down a lot. If you look at literature about young people today, they do not feel heard. They do
Yeah.
not feel like they belong. It's a terrible problem right now. A third of students in college now are anxious and depressed. They
hmm
don't feel anyone has heard them. Sometimes when I do some things in my class, they say, no one ever asked me about my values. And
Mm.
so it's kind of a conversation, and just seeing them as people would be one way. Even welcoming them in the church. Is it a child-friendly church? Sometimes you can see right away it is.
Yeah.
We have little bags for kids. Our church we always have children in worship.
Hmm.
We have a little table they can go over there. There's, colors and stuff. So you see kind of right away. We get children involved right away in the worship. They can do a lot of things, like
Mm.
offering. This one church I was at in Valparaiso, we weren't getting any families with kids. And this one family had their little boy. I think he was only like 4. And the dad had him help with the offering. And that kid loved it. It was so proud of the offering and the
Yes.
offering plate and bringing it to the front. And then we have food offering. And then we had told all the kids, bring it up to the altar. And that church grew with families because of that one little kid and
That's
the
so
dad
funny.
who had said, so it's participating. You would have them participate, right?
So this is where my passion comes from, and where I really just want you to affirm all of my beliefs and tell me that I'm right about everything, if you wouldn't mind. Okay, because so this is years ago. Me and my wife, we started bringing our son into the church service because he wasn't doing well in childcare. That was really the
Yeah.
catalyst.
Yeah.
And we had a mentor who was there with us, a wonderful woman, and she was like, "Just bring him in. He's really well behaved. He'll be fine." And then we taught our son how to listen. And then after church, we would begin asking questions. And then that became like the habit for all of our boys. And so a few years ago, when I felt the Lord calling us to launch a small home church, where we
Uh-huh.
never really wanted to grow numbers, we just wanted to grow intimacy. That was part of it, is we try to incorporate our children into this. And we have failed miserably and succeeded wonderfully various times. But one of the things that they've done so well is our kids kind of are in charge of passing out the communion elements. And so
Ooh.
they work with my wife to get the naan, cut up the naan depending on how many people we have little cups of juice, and they walk around, and they love it so much. They help
Oh.
us pick the songs that we sing for hymns, and it's wonderful to watch the church get so excited. I feel like half the time our church family wants to do communion in part because they just want to watch the kids,
Mhm.
like be
Yeah.
invested in it.
Yeah. Oh, that isn't that funny? We have a similar
Hmm.
experience there too. The simple act of helping with offering, the simple act. And there's so many layers of how you can build on that, which is very healthy for kids. Like my son is older. He was like 13 and my daughter was 7, but we had the reading for the day
Hmm.
and we practiced it. And my daughter is very tiny. She's the tiniest person in the class, and my son was the tallest.
Ah,
So they had the 2 readings for the day. And my daughter, by 7, she can read, and we practiced the reading. And so he got up and said, did his scripture, and they said, the word of the Lord, at the end. And my daughter, we had to get this step up thing, for her, and she's so tiny. But she was projecting it, right?
ah.
And everybody almost started crying because hearing that scripture read by that little kid. And then she looks up and goes, the word of the Lord. Many people told me afterwards that was the sermon.
Yeah.
Powerful. So yeah, and then you can,
Because the messenger was a child.
yeah,
The message
yeah,
had innocent. It's kind of like you hear it sometimes. The medium is the message,
yeah,
which is true to
yeah,
some extent.
yeah,
And when we make space, this is kind of what I'm thinking, because my brain's
yeah,
running a mile a minute.
yeah,
It seems like when we make space for children to be the messengers, the message has some level of deeper authenticity that sometimes adults can't bring.
yeah. I like that, making space. And you know what? It's also really good for kids. It builds their confidence.
Hmm.
It builds some skills for them. And gosh, whether you're an acolyte or reading the scripture or being involved in the little choir or helping with the bells, it is also honoring children. Sometimes I see in churches, oh, we're including the children, and they're marched out like little funny jokes on a YouTube. Do you
Yeah,
know what I mean?
I do.
We
Yes.
just kind of, oh, it's a joke and great, ha ha. There they are, so cute. Ha,
It's
ha, ha.
humoring them, not honoring them.
Right. It's yeah, it's a kind of form of entertainment
Yes.
instead of thank you. And think of that. Your kids helping with communion. I'm a part of this. And the more we can make this message, you are a part of this community. You are part of the body of Christ here. And it's, even if we were an atheist and you said, I don't want my kids to go to church there. I said, actually, a lot of assets built in church. And
Hmm.
social scientists are talking about it. They talk about being involved in a church community or religious community, a spiritual life, really helps build a child's resilience and
Mm.
a lot of skills. Just think about it. Do you know the Search Institute assets?
Mm-mm.
There's a list of 40 assets the Search Institute has for what helps children thrive. And it's things like they have a few mentors, they're involved in music, they read a lot, they're doing service for other people. And one time we had moved from Indiana to Minnesota now. My daughter was in 6th grade, and I thought it was like instant assets for my kid. Who you worried, was she going to be okay moving in 6th grade? Because she had mentors, older people, intergenerational. We always go to church.
Mm.
In my tradition, the Lutheran tradition, we're always with the kids in church. So
Okay.
she got to do the readings. She got involved in music. She was the cantor and sang. She's a very good singer. And so even in like 10th grade, she was the cantor for these
Hmm.
services, some of the services. She would do the liturgy, in the front of the church by the
Her
altar.
responsibilities became or are her assets, and
Yeah, yeah. And
instead
then,
of viewing children as a responsibility to
yeah,
be mitigated, navigated, or assigned to or delegated to someone to take care of, instead having a church environment that doesn't see them as children that need to be housed and babysat for a moment. So
yeah,
adults, and actually, I want to bring this up because this again, pet peeve,
yeah,
and I'm really just trying to get you to affirm all my. Like I'm trying to be transparent. I really don't want to be like this, but I'm struggling.
yeah.
It, I mean, I guess I'll just ask a really blunt question. Is there a place in the Western Church for a child care model of service? Is it a good thing to have a church in which parents drop their children off and the church mentality is children will be taught over there so that way parents
Mhm,
can focus and be taught over there? Because it seems
mhm,
like the predominant form, and it bothers me, and I don't know
mhm,
if it should bother me. I don't know if I'm
mhm,
being a little narrow-minded.
mhm,
Help me process that.
mhm. Yeah, well, we can maybe understand it's actually a sort of a new thing because if you look in the Bible, the people came together. If you look at Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, there they were, women, men, children, right?
Hmm.
There's not, okay, Jesus saying, please go over there. We have the Sunday school teachers over there.
Hmm.
It's kind of related to an education model, but even like, so it's not a common thing if you look at the whole history, right? But
Sure.
it comes with Sunday school, a kind of a model of education, right? And there's nothing so wrong about it, but it's, I guess, in my tradition, we do not separate children from the service. That is, it's, I think it's really important to be involved in the service with your family. So we can say it that way first. There's reasons people would say, I don't want my kids there because I can't hear the sermon. They're disruptive, right? Are those the main
Yeah. Or
reasons?
maybe they can't talk about certain things. You made the reference to Job earlier. Maybe the
Yeah,
pastor won't
yeah,
teach through
yeah,
difficult things because the children are there.
yeah. And so you could say, oh, okay, but really, spiritual life is really life-giving for kids. And it's life-giving in a context of a community. And when you see your parent, let's say the act of reading, you want your kid to learn to read. You're sitting with them, it's a warm, comfortable space. They're turning the pages. They don't know everything. They don't know the words. Even at, 6 months, they're helping turn the pages, right?
Hmm.
They see their body is brought into the rituals of reading and the pleasure of reading. See?
Mm.
So if your kid is there in worship, they're hearing the songs, they're seeing notions of prayer, they're seeing you there with them. If it can be warm, a warm, uh, a warm, a warm experience for them.
Like a
Warm,
hospitable or pleasant experience is
yeah.
kind of what you're saying.
That if we delight in God, if we could think we're delighting in our children,
Mm.
this is a space we're delighting in God and we're delighting in our children. And sadly, what I see sometimes is people who bring their children to church. It's like, you shut up, you shut up. And they're dragging even their kid out of the service by their arm, like yanking them,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
it's almost like, oh my God, what are you doing? And there's ways to prepare. I think people,
Well, Marcia, they're embarrassing me. And for the
yes,
record, I say that with deep empathy because I feel like I've had these moments where like
yeah,
my face gets really red, my kid
yeah,
just did XYZ, and I'm
yeah,
like, oh my gosh, and I'm quickly rushing them out. I just want to note that I've been this
yeah,
person in the
yeah,
last
yeah.
year. um,
Yeah. And you don't want a kid to scream throughout the service because that's something's wrong with the kid. The kid's screaming. You need to go and attend to them, right?
hmm,
So it's not like, oh, we keep them no matter what they're saying or doing, but it's actually by preparing. I don't think a lot of people prepare their kid to go to church. Are they
hmm,
fed? Do you have some snacks along? Do you have a little distraction, a little color book? That's why we have little bags when you enter our
hmm,
congregation. Little bags. They're looking forward to it. They have the little table if they want to run over there. A little table. They see themselves in it. They see young people who are acolytes lighting the
hmm.
candles. They see young people helping with the offering. They see young people singing. It's like I am part of this. But when we are impatient with our kids or we're not prepared, that's where it's not pleasant. And that's where I see people not treating children as persons. You know, when you're just like, shut up. You wouldn't say that to a friend. Shut up. Or get out of here, yank them out, right? But we somehow
Hmm.
feel we can do that to a kid. There's sometimes almost property, my property, and they can't embarrass me, like you know,
Yeah.
and I'm yanking them out now. So I actually I had two kids.
Hmm.
We went to church every Sunday, or many Sundays. Okay, I actually had no problem now, but I did a lot of preparation. Those things that I'm prepared. They've been fed. It's not get up. And sometimes people make them dress in this stuff that's uncomfortable, right? They're yanking on this
Yes.
stiff thing. So it's not comfortable. But if you think about it, if you did that when a kid's reading and you said, you shut up. I've seen that happen on some of the videos of parents who do not treat their children right. They have videos of them in the home
Sure.
where their kids kind of turning the page. No. And they slap their hand, say, no, it's not time for the page. Well, do you think the kid wants to read?
Yeah. So even if you don't even consider those kind of more extreme situations, really what
Yeah.
you're saying is to have this heart in which you are serving your children,
Yeah.
in which you're focused on creating a church experience, an experience within inside the ecclesiastical community in which they can see people like them, right? I mean, I think
Hmm.
that matters to all of us. We want to talk about that, I think, as a culture collectively when we deal with things like race, for example, but
Yeah.
oftentimes having the same conversation that children need to see people who are like them, and
Yeah.
not in these essentially segregated communities, like by moving them over here where they can, but by saying like we are come together in this diverse community
Yeah. Yeah.
that we see one
Yeah.
another, and then we say, well, how can I make the church experience pleasant for the child? And for the record, huge shout out to my wife, because so many times I said, don't let them eat snacks here, but you're kind of like, you're constantly just pushing back away against the way I want to do things, Marcia. no, but like credit to my wife, right? And you who have thought through, how can I serve my children as we go to this larger church service? I'm going to make sure they've been fed, that they've gone potty, that they're in
Right.
comfortable clothing,
Yeah.
that they have something to do to help
Hmm.
occupy their hands as they're
Hmm.
listening with their ears.
Hmm.
And if we choose to see them as individuals to be served
Hmm.
and not burdens to be shunted onto
Hmm.
someone else, or
Hmm.
or prioritize ourselves, and because I do think this is a level of selfishness. I think when people say, I need a break from my children, although I
Mhm.
fully acknowledge that we all need a sense of separation from certain
Mhm.
responsibilities at different times. That's what partly
Mhm.
Sabbath is about, not separating from children, but separating from responsibilities. Although I can acknowledge it being good, the ecclesiastical community I think, isn't a time in which we separate ourselves from the responsibility of
Mhm.
children, but it's a time in
Mhm.
which we deepen our service to one another. And there's
Mhm.
a level of selfishness to say, like,
Mhm.
I just need a break.
Mhm.
Okay. You're
Mhm.
nodding along, so I feel like I'm on
Mhm.
track here.
Mhm. Yeah, and the actions too. I think this whole physical thing, we have the hymn book, and
Hmm.
the kids, even kind of young, they can open the hymn. They can't read everything, but music is so powerful. We sing a lot in the Lutheran tradition. We're always singing,
Mm.
but that they kind of can go along with it, right? And you're
You're going to make me
standing there.
Lutheran by the end of this, Marcia. I just want you to know.
Well, there's some things wrong. Well, some problems with every tradition, but one thing we do very well is singing. And also Luther even said he wrote uh, catechisms for use in the home, because related
Mm.
to we're going to church together is all the studies show and common sense tells us doing some practices at home. And again, if it's warm and fun and delightful, children are learning so much. They're learning a bigger vocabulary, spiritually, morally. They're seeing your values. They're hearing about what you value, right? And
Hmm.
that's where I feel so sad. So many of my students say, no one asked me. We never talked about values.
Yeah.
So if you don't have that it's just a wonderful opportunity to have such a rich experience with your parents, caregivers in a worship service. It's so multidimensional. Singing, we have sometimes they'll talk about someone in trouble. We're praying for people. It builds empathy, right? You have a
Mm.
leadership role. It builds confidence in little kids. If people see you with your little kid, they say, oh, what's your name? And other people are saying hi to them later, right? My daughter has, so many people who know her from 96 to, 2 years old, right? Anya. Yeah, Anya's here, right? And so that intergenerational kind of I belong here. I have
Mm.
people who know my name. That is priceless. So that's why I was thinking one time, gosh, you can get like 20 assets by having a kid in a church community, a religious
Mm.
community. You get support. In fact, they say if a mother is involved in a church community, she's less likely to abuse her children. Why? She's not isolated, and isolation is a huge risk factor of harming your children physically or
Mm.
emotionally, right? Because you have asset, people see your kid. Oh, wow. Oops, your family's in trouble. We can help you, right? They're
Yeah.
just, and then the
Yeah.
leadership. And, we do a lot of service in our church and doing stuff together. You can do it real little. We're going to go paint somebody's house. You can help with the snacks, right? So it's not just talking to them, they see you living out your faith.
Okay, so I'm imagining some of our listeners, right? They would be thinking, well, Marcia, that's really nice for you,
Yeah.
being Lutheran and all, and
Yeah.
having that environment. But maybe I go to this non-denominational church and I feel like I have community. I'm not leaving there. And in that non-denominational church, we walk into church service and the kids go this way and I go this
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
And, and to be fair, their worship service is just not set up in a way that would be conducive for children. It'd be really difficult. Maybe they're not allowed to eat in the sanctuary. It's
Uh-huh.
really discouraged to have that
Right.
noise when the pastor's teaching. The music might be really, really loud, which may not be good for really, really young children. So
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
do we
Huh.
what kind of advice would you give to the mom and dad who are in that environment, and that is where the Lord wants them to be? That's where
Yeah.
he's
They've
directed
got
for many different
community.
reasons. How do they form their children really well,
Mhm.
even inside of a community like that?
Mhm. Yeah, and I understand, because it would I understand what you're saying. It might change the music, it might change the flow, and it's nice they're with a community. They're going with other kids to this thing. One thing that you could kind of encourage, say, isn't there a way we could have a little section where there's a table and they could have do some things together, but they're listening. But if it's too loud, I can kind of see why that might be a problem. But you might be able, I did this with another friend for a more evangelical community that didn't have kids in the service.
Mm-hmm.
But we were trying to practice things you do at home because it's really important to do stuff at home. So they did the best thing. They had a thing where you came for dinner, and then we would teach them practices you do at home. Because sometimes when you say, could you pray with your kids? And people haven't done
Oh.
that when they grow up, it looks like, okay, we're praying. We're reading the Bible. Be quiet. It's so harsh. It's like, read the Bible with my kids? No way. It's just, ugh.
Or my generation, Marcia, like it wouldn't necessarily look like that. I think it would look a lot like avoiding or fumbling through because we don't really know what it would look like at all.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think I would track it with you.
Yeah.
So this couple, they would bring people in and teach them?
So we had big tables. We made it a nice family night. And so we
Okay.
had I don't know, 20 tables, and your families would sit around the table.
Okay.
And one time we learned about praying. How do you pray? And we had a meal. We practiced a
I
few
really
prayers.
like this.
Yeah. And because people's, like you say, it's like, I don't know what to do. Let's not even do it. Let's avoid it, right?
Yeah.
But they saw how easy it is and how fun. And here's some prayers. That gave them a few prayers you could say before a meal. And it is beautiful. It's also really healthy for you to stop and be grateful for your meal. But then, and it was just fun and funny, right?
Yeah.
So we did that, and we talked about service, what you might do. And so we had also talking about gratitude. I do that every night with my kids, and they kept it up in their adults. They're adults
Oh.
now. But saying your blessings, gratitude is a big, you look at the social science on that, it's like,
Yeah. Yes.
it's huge, right? So
Mm-hmm.
then we had one practice of gratitude. What are we doing at night? What does it mean to say gratitude? So everybody felt comfortable, the parents and the kids, and saw it can be kind of messy, it can be fun. So it's not just, now we're praying, or I don't
Yeah.
know what to do here. So we'll forget it, right?
Yeah.
So
So
there's
it's
a
like
way.
I think there's an argument there to be say to say that the church's responsibility is to disciple the parents into discipling the children,
Yes. Yes.
and that oftentimes, and we're both teachers by profession, so
Uh-huh.
we kind of know the limitations of lecture. They're pretty limited,
Yeah.
You can give information, but when you sit down and you walk somebody through the steps, that's
Mm-hmm.
so much more powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like a lot of times we want to disciple parents by doing like a series on parenting. And
Yeah.
like we do a sermon series on parenting. Now we've taught everyone to be parents, and like we know that does not work. And so
Yeah.
instead, creating an environment in which you come with your family and you kind of have a piece of that worship in the home element. Like
Mm-hmm.
my imagination is running. Like
Mm-hmm.
I might teach people, how do you take communion with your family? How do
Mm-hmm.
you lead your children through communion? How do you
Mm-hmm.
lead your children through prayer? How do you lead your children
Mm-hmm.
through gratefulness? How do you read the Bible
Mm-hmm.
um, with your
Yeah.
children? And that isn't a picture Bible. Which,
Mm-hmm.
for the record, I'm going to fully rabbit trail here for a moment, Marcia. Are picture Bibles heretical? I'm asking the tough
That is a
questions
big
today.
rabbit hole, but there's maybe a place for them. But yeah, there's all big studies about that and
Are
how
there
they've
really?
been done. Yeah,
Oh,
and
wow.
why we do them and what stories are chosen, what pictures.
Yeah.
So, but reading, there's a lot of wonderful scripture that you can read, just read to kids, right? But
Mm.
I like however you're going to do that. But yeah, we even had a session on that. Now that I say, like, how do you have devotions? How do you read
Mm.
about the Bible? Or sometimes it will be snippets, and then talk about it, and then say a prayer or something. But yeah, that would be, it's kind of helping, because really, in addition to honoring the full humanity of children, there's vulnerabilities, but their strengths, they're fully human, but they're developing, and just seeing them as real people. Gosh, that goes a long way, because then why wouldn't we welcome them? Why wouldn't we do
Mm.
something? But the other thing is supporting parents and encouraging them to carry out practice at home, because really all the science shows, the social science, that religion is something not necessarily taught but caught, and it's really important in the home. And it's not like I have to spend 2 hours a day on this. It's prayers are important, the gratitude practices, things at night, reading a little something, being able to talk together and asking questions. I think parents sometimes feel like I have to know the answer, but I don't know the answer. I know nothing.
Yeah.
They can go, I don't know either. Wow, what a great question.
Hmm.
And look further into it. So it's not a lot of practices, but it's something daily, and it's part of life. And if you are worshiping together, it also creates wonderful memories together, being in church together.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have terrible sermons, sometimes we have good ones, but on the way home, we'd always talk about, wow, did you listen to that? It creates a lot of bonding, see? So you can do that, yeah, because that's the second thing. And some even say the most children will follow their parents. So, and Luther said, parents are the bishops and apostles and priests to their children.
Hmm.
That's why catechism was in the house, in the home, talking about things. So,
Marcia, it's such a blessing, and I really do feel like those 2 points are really the thesis of the whole thing, right?
mhm,
Churches to think about and to act in a way that demonstrates that children are fully like valued humans.
yeah,
And it sounds so obvious to say, but I don't know if our actions always align with that, because many times our actions treat children as like it sounds extreme, but subhuman, right?
yeah,
They're over there and they can't give to me, and I
mhm,
can't receive from them.
mhm,
And then to disciple parents to treat their children as fully human and fully valued as human, um, but also to help parents navigate through the complexities of raising disciples and
mhm,
being the apostles and the bishops of
mhm,
to their children. I like that.
mhm. Well, that's well said. Yeah, those are two pretty powerful ideas that get you quite a long way, because then it's a cooperative effort between your religious community and your home. And everyone's looking at children more with, like, wow, really stepping back to see how rich, how interesting of persons they are, right? All their gifts and frustrations and all kinds of ideas, but questions. If that can happen, a lot can happen. So thank you for that nice summary, Phil.
Well, and thank you for this conversation, because it really has helped mature my thoughts on this. If I'm really honest, I was struggling with, and still probably will continue to struggle with. I think church should just be my way, and I wish people would do it my way. And but
Mhm,
instead of having a particular method that you say church has to happen this way, instead saying like this is a good guiding principle for how we view
mhm,
children in the church,
mhm,
and that can still look diverse and different across church
mhm,
communities and
mhm,
across different just places, around the world and around the United States. But if
mhm,
we are valuing children as
mhm,
fully human and capable of,
mhm,
of giving back to us, then I think we will be just fine. I am so grateful for all the really heavy academic work that you have done over the last 20 years. I'm even more excited about, we know you're working on a book that's going to be a little more mainstream, kind of help us break these topics and subjects down. I'm committing to having you back on when that book comes out, because I'm going to read it and I'm going to soak it up, and then I want to talk to you about it. So until then, thank you so much for the work that you've done for the church. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Living Room Disciple podcast. My conversation with Marcia was a blessing to me and helped me narrow in my understanding of how children should be a part of the church. You can check the show notes for other articles that she's contributed to or written, and we'll also link some of the academic books that she's published. Please go ahead and check those out if this topic interests you, but we'll have her back when she writes her more mainstream book, helping us really process through children in the church. Check us out on livingroomdisciple.com for more information about who we are and how we work. Follow us on all the socials. Huge shout out to Anissa Live for all the amazing production work, to Eric Church for getting this podcast out there and all the marketing, and to Daniel Ramirez for composing the music for the show. And thank you to you for sticking around and being a part of the Living Room Disciple. We couldn't do it without you. So, thanks for tuning into this episode where discipleship finds a home.